Butternut squash just happens to be one of my favorite things to eat and cook. It's a bit sweeter and less stringier than most squash, but it also has a subtle flavor, which makes it perfect when you're experimenting in the kitchen. You season it with simple herbs, and you can use it in all sorts of recipes, like in my butternut squash and ricotta crostini. Perhaps the easiest way to cook butternut squash, for me at least, is to roast it. You season it with salt and pepper, drizzle over some olive oil, and you throw it in the oven for about 30 minutes, and that's it. All you do is peel the squash, and then you want to chop the squash into cubes that are about half an inch thick or so. So once you've chopped up all of your squash, you just want to toss all of it into a baking pan. We're going to drizzle it with a couple of tablespoons of olive oil, probably a tablespoon or two, not too much. We just want to coat it a little bit so that when it roasts in the oven, it doesn't burn. Then we're going to season that with some salt and pepper. And we're going to toss it all together. And you just want to spread that out into a single layer just to make sure that it cooks evenly and you don't get any pieces of squash that have been charred and some other pieces that are raw. So when that's all coated and glistening and seasoned with salt and pepper, we're going to want to put that in an oven that's been preheated to about 425. Set that in there for about 25 minutes, and the beauty of it is you can just leave it alone, walk away, and do other important things. Okay, so it's been about 25 minutes. We're going to check on our squash just to see how they're doing. Woohoo! Okay, so as you can see, the squash has turned this beautiful vibrant shade of orange, which is exactly what you want. And if you were to peel some of the squash, it would be tender and soft, but not mushy, which is perfect. Alright, so now that our squash has been cooked, we're just going to set that aside for a couple of minutes, let that cool. And now we're going to start working on our ricotta mixture, which is nothing more than just ricotta and some lemon. So we're going to need about 1 cup of ricotta. This is an eyeball mixture, it doesn't have to be precise. And to that we're going to add 1 lemon, or rather the zest of 1 lemon. So when I cook with lemons, I typically like to use their zest instead of the juice because I find that you get a lot more flavor out of the zest. And also, when you use the zest, it doesn't really alter the texture of whatever ingredient that you're using. Just going to mix that all together. Alright, so now that that's done, we're going to set that aside and we're going to go grab our baguette. Alright, so you want to cut your baguette into probably 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch thick slices. Okay, so when you've cut up your baguette, you just want to lay them out onto a baking tray. You don't have to grease it, because we're just going to pop these into the oven for a few minutes to toast them, 350 degrees for about 10 to 15 minutes. And you want to do this in a single layer so that all of your bread slices get toasted evenly. Right, so I've got all of our bread laid out. I'm going to pop it into the oven at 350 for about 10 to 15 minutes, at which time they're going to be just slightly golden brown but not burnt. So I'm just doing the last part of our crostini here. We're making the garnish, and all I did really was heat up some olive oil in a pan, lay out some sage leaves, and just flash fry them for a couple of minutes. Essentially what you want are sage leaves that have kind of curled up on the edges and have turned a deep jade green in color. And once that's crisp up, it'll only probably take a couple of minutes. Once the sage leaves are done, you just want to remove them over to a paper towel, just to blot off any excess oil. But what you don't want to do is you don't want to get rid of all the excess oil in the pan, because essentially what you have here is sage-infused olive oil, which we're going to use a little bit later. And we're just going to put the last bit of our sage leaves onto a paper towel. And we're going to check how our bread's doing. All right, perfect. Our bread's been toasted, our sage leaves are crisped up, our butternut squash is roasted, and our ricotta mixture is sitting on the counter. I think we're ready to assemble. Now, we're going to put on the finishing touches, which are nothing more than just a couple of our crisped up sage leaves. All we're going to do is drizzle some of this over our crostini. Okay, just going to set that on our little serving platter. A good friend of mine, one of my former roommates from International House, actually got this plate for me for my birthday. She had it sent all the way from Chicago. And there we have it. Our butternut squash, ricotta, and sage crostini. It's like a piece of fall in every bite. This is so good. Butternut squash just happens to be one of my favorite things to eat and cook. Shit! All you do is peel the squash. Such a match. I know how to cook, I swear, I really do. Squash has been cooked. Just let that to cool, allow that to... Okay. Can you do that again?
Okay, do you want to see what...
Alright, so we're gonna put that in... What's wrong?
I went in instead of coming out.
But it doesn't really... Okay.
Here go.
Doing butternut squash, ricotta, and sage crostini. It's like a bite of fall in